The hand that grabbed her wrist was calloused and strong, and Rosalie knew with a sinking certainty that this was the end of everything. She had been so careful, waiting until the afternoon sun baked the dusty streets of Redemption, Texas empty, before slipping behind the general store where crates of supplies sat stacked against the weathered wood. Her fingers had just closed around a cloth-wrapped parcel of dried beef when iron fingers circled her thin wrist, and she looked up into the bluest eyes she had ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face beneath the brim of a dusty Stetson hat. "Let me go," she whispered, her voice hoarse with fear and desperation. At 19 years old, Rosalie had learned that the world showed no mercy to the poor and desperate, and being caught stealing meant jail or worse. The cowboy did not let go, but his grip gentled slightly as he studied her face. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard work and harder living. His dark hair curled slightly at his collar, and his jaw was shadowed with several days of stubble. He looked to be in his mid-20s, young still but with eyes that had seen more than most. "That is not yours," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried the faint trace of somewhere east, though worn smooth by years out west. The year was 1879, and Texas was still wild enough that justice came swift and harsh. "Please," Rosalie said, hating the tremor in her voice. "Please, I will put it back. Just let me go." His blue eyes moved from her face down to take in her appearance, and she knew what he saw. Her dress had once been a respectable calico print, but now it hung on her thin frame, faded and patched in a dozen places. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a braid, but wisps escaped around her face, which was too pale except for the spots of color high on her cheeks. Her green eyes were too large in her face, shadowed with exhaustion and hunger that went bone deep. "When did you last eat?" he asked, and the question surprised her so much that she forgot to lie. "2 days ago. I gave my portion to my brother and sisters." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes that she had not expected. "How many brothers and sisters?" 3. "Thomas is 7, Mary is 5, and little James just turned 3. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Our parents died 6 months ago. Cholera swept through our homestead. I have been trying to keep us together, but work is scarce for women alone, and I cannot leave them to go far for employment. The widow who was watching them turned us out last week when I could not pay her anymore. We have been sleeping in the old barn at the edge of town, the one behind the abandoned church." The cowboy was silent for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he did something that shocked her completely. He picked up the parcel of dried beef and placed it in her hands. "Take it," he said simply. Rosalie stared at him, unable to comprehend. "What? Take the beef, and wait here." He released her wrist and walked around to the front of the store, leaving her standing there clutching the parcel, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to take this miraculous gift and flee before he changed his mind or returned with the sheriff. But something kept her rooted to the spot, some quality in his voice or his eyes that made her believe, against all reason, that he meant her no harm. He returned minutes later carrying 2 full burlap sacks, provisions bulging from within. "Show me where your siblings are," he said. "Why?" Rosalie asked, suspicion finally overriding her shock. "Because children should not go hungry," he said simply, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. "My name is Jacob Brennan. I own a ranch about 5 miles north of town, and unless I miss my guess, you and your family need help." "I do not need charity," Rosalie said, lifting her chin despite the hollow ache in her belly. "I am not offering charity," Jacob said, his blue eyes steady on hers. "I am offering a fair trade. You look like you can cook and clean, and God knows my ranch house is a disaster. I have been living like a bachelor too long, and my hands complain about my cooking. You work for me, and I will provide room and board for you and your siblings. Fair wages on top of that." It was too good to be true, which meant it probably was. Rosalie had learned that the world did not hand out miracles to desperate girls with hungry siblings. "What do you really want?" she asked, her voice hard. Jacob's expression did not change, but she saw a flicker of something that might have been respect in his eyes. "Exactly what I said. I need help running my household, and you need a safe place for your family. I have a foreman and 4 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse, but the main house is just me. It has 4 bedrooms upstairs. You and your sister can take one, your brothers can share another. Honest work for honest pay." "How do I know you are not lying? How do I know you will not?" She could not finish the sentence, but she did not need to. His jaw tightened, and for the first time she saw anger flash in his eyes, though she sensed it was not directed at her. "You have my word. I will not touch you or harm you or your siblings in any way. If you want, I will put it in writing. We can go to the lawyer right now and draw up a contract." Rosalie studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or cruelty. She found none. What she found instead was something that looked almost like loneliness, a bone-deep solitude that she recognized because she carried her own version of it. This was a man who understood what it meant to be alone. "Show me your ranch first," she said finally. "Then I will decide." Jacob nodded as though he had expected nothing less. "Can you ride?" "I used to before. Before everything fell apart," she did not say. "I have my horse tied out front. It will carry us both long enough to collect your siblings, then we will all ride out together." The next hour passed in a blur that felt almost dreamlike. Jacob's horse was a fine bay gelding with a gentle eye, and he lifted Rosalie into the saddle as easily as if she weighed nothing before swinging up behind her. The heat of his body at her back was strange and unsettling, but not frightening. He held the reins loosely, his arms forming a loose bracket around her, careful not to touch her more than necessary. They rode to the old barn, and when Rosalie climbed down and pushed open the creaking door, her heart clenched at the sight that greeted her. Thomas, Mary, and little James were huddled together in the corner on a pile of old hay, their faces lighting up when they saw her. "Rosie!" Mary cried, scrambling to her feet. She was a tiny thing, small for her 5 years, with their mother's blonde hair and their father's brown eyes. "You came back. We were worried." "I told you she would come back," Thomas said, trying to sound brave and grown-up, though his voice wavered. He had their father's dark hair and Rosalie's green eyes, and he had been trying so hard to be the man of the family since their parents died. "She always comes back." Little James just held up his arms, wanting to be picked up, and Rosalie scooped him up even though her arms ached with exhaustion. He was so light, too light, and the knowledge of what her failures had cost him burned in her chest. "I brought someone," she said, and Jacob stepped into the barn, ducking slightly to clear the doorway. He had left the sacks of provisions with his horse, and now he stood there, this tall stranger, looking at her siblings with an expression she could not quite read. "Hello," he said gently, crouching down so he was closer to their eye level. "My name is Jacob. Your sister and I have been talking, and I have a proposition for all of you." Thomas immediately stepped in front of his sisters, his small hands balling into fists. "You leave us alone. Rosalie takes care of us just fine." "Thomas," Rosalie said, but Jacob held up a hand. "You are right to be protective," he said seriously, speaking to Thomas as though he were an adult. "A man should look out for his family, but your sister has been carrying a heavy burden alone, and I think you all deserve better than this barn. I have a ranch with plenty of room and plenty of food. I have offered your sister a job keeping my house, and that means all of you would come live there too. You would have real beds and 3 meals a day. What do you think?" Thomas looked at Rosalie, his eyes full of questions. She nodded slowly. "I want to see his ranch first, but I think he is telling the truth." "Why?" Thomas asked Jacob directly. "Why would you help us?" Jacob was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Because someone helped me once when I needed it most, and because it is the right thing to do." It was not a complete answer, Rosalie knew, but it was honest enough for now. They rode out to Jacob's ranch. James perched in front of Jacob on the saddle, chattering away with the fearless friendliness of a 3-year-old who did not yet understand that the world could be cruel. Mary rode with Rosalie, while Thomas walked beside the horse with the stubborn independence of a 7-year-old boy trying to prove he was tough. The ranch, when they reached it, took Rosalie's breath away. It was not a grand estate by any means, but it was solid and well-maintained, speaking of prosperity earned through honest work. The main house was a 2-story structure with a wide front porch, painted white with green shutters. Behind it stood a large barn, several corrals with good fencing, and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. Cattle grazed in the distance, and she could see fields that had been planted with care. "It is not much," Jacob said, and she realized he was watching her face, "but it is home." "It is beautiful," she whispered, and she meant it. He showed them through the house, and Rosalie tried not to stare at the space, the cleanliness, the sheer abundance of it all. The kitchen was large and well-stocked, though currently in a state of bachelor disarray. The parlor had comfortable furniture and a stone fireplace. Upstairs, the 4 bedrooms were simply furnished but clean, with real beds and quilts and windows that let in the afternoon light. "The room at the end of the hall is mine," Jacob said. "You can choose from the other 3. "Why are you really doing this?" Rosalie asked again, needing to understand. Jacob looked out the window at his land, his expression distant. "I built this place from nothing after the war. Spent 5 years working every daylight hour, saving every penny, building something that would last. But a house is not a home when you are the only one in it. I am not trying to buy a family, Rosalie, but if I can help one and in return have some life in these empty rooms, that seems like a fair trade to both of us." The vulnerability in his voice decided her. "We will stay," she said. "On a trial basis, 1 month. If it does not work out, we leave, no questions asked." "Fair enough," Jacob said and held out his hand. She took it, and they shook on it like business partners, though the warmth of his palm against hers sent an unexpected shiver through her. That first evening set the pattern for the days that followed. Jacob showed Rosalie the kitchen, the pantry stocked with more food than she had seen in 6 months. He was true to his word, treating her with respect and maintaining a careful distance. He gave her money to ride into town the next day and buy proper clothes for the children, fabric to make herself some new dresses. The children bloomed like flowers after rain. Within a week, color returned to their cheeks. Mary started laughing again, a sound Rosalie had not heard in so long. It made her eyes sting with tears. Thomas began to relax, to act like the 7-year-old boy he was instead of a miniature adult carrying the weight of the world. James attached himself to Jacob with the single-minded devotion of a small child who had found a hero, and Jacob bore it with patience and gentleness that surprised Rosalie. She threw herself into her work, determined to prove she was earning their keep. She scrubbed the house from top to bottom, organized the chaos of Jacob's kitchen, mended clothes and curtains that had been neglected for too long. She learned to cook for the ranch hands, hearty meals that filled their bellies and earned their grudging respect. The foreman, a grizzled man in his 50s named Pete, had been skeptical at first. "Boss does not need some charity case messing up his house," she had overheard him mutter to one of the other hands. But Pete's wife had died 2 years back, and he had a soft spot for children. When he saw Thomas trying to help with chores, saw Mary carefully setting the table for dinner, saw little James toddling after Jacob like a devoted puppy, his attitude changed. "You are doing fine," he told Rosalie one evening as she brought dinner out to the bunkhouse. "Real fine." This place needed a woman's touch. The summer heat bore down on Texas with relentless intensity, but the ranch had good shade trees and a creek that ran through the property. Jacob taught Thomas to fish, and the boy glowed with pride when he caught his first catfish. Mary discovered the wild flowers that grew near the creek and started making bouquets for the dinner table. James followed Jacob everywhere, mimicking his walk, his mannerisms, even trying to wear his hat. And Rosalie found herself watching Jacob more than she meant to. He was up before dawn every morning, working alongside his men in the heat and dust. He was fair but firm, the kind of boss men respected and followed. She saw the way he treated his animals with care, never cruel, always patient. She saw the way he played with James, tossing the boy in the air until he shrieked with laughter, or helped Thomas with his chores without making the boy feel small. And she saw the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not watching. There was admiration in his eyes, and something warmer that made her pulse skip, but never anything that made her feel unsafe or uncomfortable. 3 weeks into their arrangement, a storm rolled across the plains, one of those violent Texas thunderstorms that turned the sky black and shook the house with thunder. Mary was terrified of storms, had been ever since the night their parents died when lightning had struck a tree near their homestead and split it down the middle. Rosalie was holding Mary in the kitchen, trying to soothe her, when Jacob came in from securing the barn. He was soaked through, his shirt plastered to his chest, water dripping from his hat. He took one look at Mary's tear-streaked face and immediately knelt beside them. "Hey there, little one," he said softly. "Storms are scary, are they not?" Mary nodded, burying her face against Rosalie's shoulder. "Can I tell you a secret?" Jacob said. "I used to be scared of storms too when I was your age." Mary peeked at him, clearly not believing that this strong, capable man could be scared of anything. "It is true," Jacob said, "but my father taught me something that helped. He said that storms are just the earth getting clean, washing away all the dust and the heat. And after every storm, there is always something beautiful. Do you know what?" Mary shook her head. "A rainbow," Jacob said, "and I bet if we are patient, we will see one when this storm passes. Want to wait by the window with me and watch for it?" He held out his hand, and after a moment, Mary took it. Rosalie watched as Jacob carried Mary to the parlor window, settling into the big armchair with the little girl in his lap, talking to her softly about storms and rainbows and how brave she was. Something cracked open in Rosalie's chest, something she had been keeping carefully locked away. It was dangerous to feel this much, to let herself hope for things that might not be hers to have. But watching Jacob with Mary, seeing the gentleness in his eyes, the patience in his voice, she felt hope bloom anyway. When the storm passed and a rainbow arced across the clearing sky, Mary clapped her hands and declared that Jacob was magic. He laughed, a sound that was becoming more common around the house, and met Rosalie's eyes over Mary's head. The look that passed between them was charged with something unspoken but undeniable. That night, after the children were asleep, Rosalie found Jacob sitting on the front porch, watching the stars emerge in the rain-washed sky. She had been working up her courage all evening, and now she stepped out onto the porch, her heart hammering. "Thank you," she said. "For what you did with Mary, you did not have to do that." "I wanted to," Jacob said simply. He was looking at the stars, not at her, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "She is a sweet child, they all are. They love you," Rosalie said quietly. "James talks about you constantly. Thomas wants to be just like you, and Mary thinks you hung the moon. And you?" Jacob asked, his voice so low she almost missed it. "What do you think?" Rosalie's breath caught. This was the moment, she realized, where everything could change. She could retreat back to the safe distance they had been maintaining, pretend she had not heard the question, or she could be brave. "I think," she said slowly, "that you are the most decent man I have ever met. I think you saved us when we needed saving, and you have been nothing but kind and honorable. And I think I am starting to feel things I probably should not feel." Jacob turned to look at her then, and the intensity in his blue eyes made her breath stop altogether. "And if I told you that I have been fighting those same feelings since the first day I saw you? That every morning I wake up and the first thing I think about is whether you slept well, and every evening the best part of my day is sitting down to the dinner table with you and the children? What would you say then?" "I would say that we agreed on a trial month," Rosalie whispered. "And we should probably not complicate things." "Probably not," Jacob agreed, but he stood and crossed to where she stood, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "But I have never been particularly good at doing what I probably should do." "Jacob," she said, his name a plea and a prayer. "Tell me to go and I will," he said. Tell me you do not want this, and I will never speak of it again. But if there is any chance that you feel even a fraction of what I feel, Rosalie, then I need to know. Because this month is almost up, and I am terrified you are going to leave, and I do not know if I can stand it. I feel it, she whispered. God help me, I feel it too. He reached up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused hand. His thumb brushed across her cheek with a gentleness that made her eyes sting with tears. I am going to kiss you now, he said softly, if that is all right. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and then his lips were on hers and the world fell away. The kiss was gentle and sweet and full of a tenderness that made her chest ache. His other hand came up to frame her face, holding her like she was something precious, something to be cherished. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard, and she could see the wonder in his eyes that she knew must be reflected in her own. I want you to stay, Jacob said, his forehead resting against hers. Not as my housekeeper. Well, yes, I mean, if you want to keep doing that, but I want you to stay as my family. You and Thomas and Mary and James. I want to take care of all of you, and I want you to let me, and I know it is fast, and I know it is probably crazy, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life. You barely know me, Rosalie said, but there was no conviction in her words. I know you work until you are ready to drop to make sure your siblings have everything they need. I know you are brave enough to steal food when you are desperate, and brave enough to trust a stranger when you have every reason not to. I know you make the best biscuits I have ever tasted, and you sing when you think no one is listening, and you love your family with a fierceness that takes my breath away. What else do I need to know? That I am terrified, she admitted. That I lost everyone I loved once, and I do not know if I can survive losing anyone else. You will not lose me, Jacob said with quiet certainty. I promise you that. I am not going anywhere. She wanted to believe him. Standing there in the starlight with his hands gentle on her face and his eyes full of promises, she wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. Can we go slow? She asked. Can we see where this goes without rushing? As slow as you need, Jacob promised. I am not going anywhere. They stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the darkness, and Rosalie let herself lean into his strength. For the first time in 6 months, she did not feel alone. The next few weeks unfolded with a sweetness that Rosalie had never expected to experience. Jacob courted her properly, despite the fact that they lived in the same house. He brought her wildflowers from the creek. He took her riding in the evenings after the children were asleep, showing her the boundaries of his land and talking about his dreams for the ranch. He told her about his childhood in Virginia, about losing his parents to a fever when he was 15, about fighting in the war and coming west to build something new. I wanted something that was mine, he said one evening as they sat by the creek, their horses grazing nearby. Something I built with my own hands that no war or fever or bad luck could take away. But I realize now that a place is not what makes a home. People are. You have built something amazing here, Rosalie said, looking out at the land that rolled away in gentle swells, golden in the evening light. You should be proud. I am proud of what I have built, Jacob said. But I was lonely, Rosalie, so lonely that I did not even realize how much I was missing until you and your siblings arrived. Now when I come home at night, there is laughter in the house. There are flowers on the table and clean curtains in the windows and James waiting to tell me about his day, and there is you. He turned to look at her, and the emotion in his eyes made her breath catch. You make everything better, brighter, more real. I wake up and I know what I am working for. I know why I am building this place. It is for you and for them, and I have never been more certain of anything. I am falling in love with you, Rosalie said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. I did not mean to, and I know it is fast, but I am falling in love with you, Jacob Brennan, and it terrifies me. Joy blazed across his face like sunrise. Then we are even, he said, because I fell in love with you the moment you looked at me with those fierce green eyes and told me you did not need charity. You were so brave and so stubborn, and I thought, there is a woman worth knowing. There is a woman worth keeping. He kissed her then, and it was different from the first kiss. This one was deeper, more certain, full of promise and heat that made her forget everything except the feel of his arms around her and his mouth on hers. When they finally broke apart, both of them were shaking. "Marry me," Jacob said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know it is too soon, and I know you need time, but marry me, Rosalie. Let me be your husband and a father to your siblings. Let me give you the life you deserve, the safety and stability and love. Let me love you for the rest of my life." Rosalie's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears, the kind she had forgotten existed. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Jacob, I will marry you." He let out a whoop of pure joy and picked her up, spinning her around until she was laughing breathlessly. When he set her down, he kissed her again, softer this time, full of reverence. "I am going to make you so happy," he promised. "I swear it." "You already have," she said, and meant it with her whole heart. They were married a month later in the small church in Redemption. It was a simple ceremony, but it was perfect. Thomas stood up with Jacob as his best man, so proud and serious in his new suit that Rosalie almost cried. Mary was the flower girl, scattering petals with solemn concentration. James sat in the front row with Pete's sister, who had come from the neighboring town to help watch him, though he called out "Rosie," "Jacob," twice during the ceremony, making everyone laugh. Rosalie wore a dress of cream silk that Jacob had insisted on buying her, despite her protests that it was too much. "Nothing is too much for you," he had said firmly. "You are going to be my wife, and I want everyone to see how beautiful you are." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed her with a tenderness that made the whole congregation sigh. As they walked down the aisle together, Rosalie saw the future spreading out before them like the Texas plains, wide and open and full of possibility. The ranch became their home in truth, not just in practice. Jacob moved Rosalie's things into his room, and that first night as husband and wife, he held her with a gentleness that made her forget every fear she had ever carried. He worshipped her body like she was something sacred, and when they finally came together, it was with a completeness that felt like coming home. Afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, Rosalie let herself cry, releasing months of fear and grief and exhaustion. Jacob held her through it, his hands stroking her hair, murmuring words of comfort and love. "You are safe now," he said. "You are all safe. I promise you, Rosalie, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to be afraid or hungry or alone again." And she believed him. The seasons turned, and life on the ranch settled into a rhythm that felt right. Thomas started school in town, riding there and back each day on the gentle mare Jacob had bought him. He excelled at his studies and came home bursting with things to share. Mary started school the following year, and though she was shy at first, she soon blossomed, making friends and bringing home drawings she made for Jacob and Rosalie. James grew like a weed, turning from a toddler into a rambunctious little boy who followed Jacob everywhere, and declared he was going to be a rancher when he grew up, just like his pa. It was Jacob he called Pa, not his real father, and the first time he said it, Jacob had to turn away and clear his throat roughly. "Is that all right?" Rosalie had asked softly, putting her hand on his arm. "That he calls you that?" "It is more than all right," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. "It is an honor." 2 years into their marriage, Rosalie discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when the doctor in town confirmed it, joy and terror warred in her chest. She had been so young when her mother died, had seen firsthand how dangerous childbirth could be, but when she told Jacob, he swept her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt his tears wet against her neck. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said, pulling back to look at her face. "Rosalie, you have given me everything. A home, a family, love I never thought I would have, and now this. How could I be anything but overjoyed?" He was protective to the point of being overbearing during her pregnancy, constantly worried about her doing too much. Rosalie bore it with patience because she knew it came from love, though she did have to firmly tell him that she was pregnant, not made of glass, and she was perfectly capable of cooking dinner. The children were excited about the baby, each in their own way. Thomas, now 9 years old, declared he would teach the baby everything important. Mary, who was 7, started sewing baby clothes with painstaking care. And James, who was 5, kept patting Rosalie's growing belly and telling the baby about all the adventures they would have. When Rosalie's labor started on a warm September evening in 1881, Jacob paced the downstairs like a caged animal while Pete's sister, who had midwife experience, attended to Rosalie upstairs. Thomas tried to be brave, but Rosalie could hear the fear in his voice when he asked Jacob if she would be all right. "Your sister is the strongest person I know," Jacob said, his voice carrying up the stairs. "She is going to be just fine." The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Rosalie thought she could not go on. But then she would hear Jacob's voice floating up from downstairs, telling the children stories to distract them, and she would find the strength to push through the next wave of pain. Finally, as the sun rose on a new day, their son was born. He came into the world squalling and red-faced and perfect, and when the midwife placed him in Rosalie's arms, she felt a love so overwhelming it left her breathless. Jacob was allowed upstairs a few minutes later, and the look on his face when he saw his son was something Rosalie knew she would remember for the rest of her life. His eyes filled with tears, and his hands shook as he reached out to touch the baby's tiny head. "He is perfect," Jacob whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Rosalie. Thank you for this gift." They named him Daniel Jacob Brennan, and he became the center of their world. Thomas was a devoted big brother, protective and proud. Mary loved helping care for him, singing him lullabies in her sweet voice. James was fascinated by the baby, though he was disappointed that Daniel could not play yet. Watching Jacob with their son, Rosalie fell in love with him all over again. He was a devoted father, getting up in the middle of the night when Daniel cried, walking the floors to soothe him, talking to him with the same seriousness he had shown Thomas all those years ago. "You are good at this," Rosalie said one night, watching Jacob rock Daniel in the chair by the window, moonlight silvering them both. "I have a good teacher," Jacob said, nodding toward her. "I watched how you were with your siblings, how you put them first always, no matter what it cost you. I am just trying to follow your example." "We make a good team," Rosalie said. "The best," Jacob agreed. Life continued its steady rhythm. The ranch prospered under Jacob's careful management. He expanded the herd, bought more land, hired more hands. But he was always careful to keep his priorities straight, never working so much that he neglected his family. Every evening he came home for dinner, and every Sunday they went to church together, the whole family filling a pew. They became a fixture in redemption, the Brennan family, respected and well-liked. Rosalie became friends with the other ranch wives, and Jacob became known as a fair man to do business with. The children grew and thrived, each finding their place in the world. When Daniel was 2, Rosalie discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and when she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Grace, the whole family rejoiced. Sarah had her father's blue eyes and her mother's auburn hair, and she was adored from the moment she arrived. Thomas was 13 now, already helping on the ranch in earnest, learning the business from the ground up. He had grown tall and strong, with a good head for numbers, and a way with animals that reminded Rosalie painfully of their father. Jacob had taught him everything he knew, and Thomas soaked it up like a sponge. Mary was 11, sweet and artistic, filling the house with her drawings and needlework. She had their mother's gentle nature and kind heart, always the first to notice if someone was hurt or sad. She doted on her younger siblings, especially Sarah. James was 7, rambunctious and fearless, constantly getting into scrapes that made Rosalie's hair turn gray. He idolized Thomas and followed him around the ranch whenever he could, determined to be just as good a rancher. The years flowed past like the creek that ran through their property, steady and sure. Daniel grew into a quiet, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as horses. Sarah was a force of nature, fearless and opinionated, keeping them all on their toes. Jacob's hair started showing threads of silver at the temples, and fine lines formed around Rosalie's eyes from years of smiling. When Thomas turned 18, he came to Jacob and Rosalie with a request. "There is a neighboring ranch," he said, his green eyes serious. "Old man Henderson wants to sell. He has no children to leave it to, and his wife passed last winter. I have been saving my wages, and I thought with a loan from the bank I could buy it, make it something good. I know I am young, but you have taught me well, Pa, I can do this." Jacob looked at his stepson, this young man who had been a frightened 7-year-old boy when they met, and Rosalie saw the pride shining in her husband's eyes. "I will co-sign your loan," Jacob said, "and I will help you however I can, but that ranch will be yours, Thomas. You will build it and you will make the decisions. I trust you completely." Thomas's eyes filled with tears, though he blinked them back quickly. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough, "for everything, for taking us in when we had nothing, for treating us like your own. For being the father I needed." Jacob pulled Thomas into a rough embrace, and Rosalie had to turn away, her own eyes stinging. Her little brother was a man now, ready to build his own life, and she was so proud she could hardly stand it. The years continued to pass. Thomas married a sweet girl from town named Anna, and they started their own family on his ranch. Mary fell in love with the doctor's son, a gentle man named Daniel who shared her love of art and beauty. James grew into a young man who was as good with horses as Jacob, maybe better, and who had a gift for training that brought buyers from towns away. Daniel and Sarah grew up in a house full of love and laughter, never knowing the hunger and fear their older siblings had experienced. They knew their parents' story, of course, the romantic tale of how their father had caught their mother stealing and fell in love with her instead of turning her over to the law. It was a family legend, told and retold, each telling making it more magical. But Rosalie never forgot those desperate days, the fear that had driven her to steal, the uncertainty of whether she and her siblings would survive. She remembered it every time she sat down to a full table. She remembered it when she tucked her children into warm beds. She remembered it when she woke in the night and felt Jacob's solid presence beside her. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Jacob surprised her with a trip, just the two of them, leaving the children with Thomas and Anna. He took her to San Antonio, to a fine hotel with a real restaurant and indoor plumbing. They spent 3 days acting like courting sweethearts again, walking the streets hand in hand, eating fancy meals, staying up late talking about nothing and everything. On their last night, as they lay in the hotel bed with the windows open to catch the breeze, Jacob pulled her close and said, "Do you remember what I told you that first night on the porch, when I asked you to marry me?" "You said you would make me happy," Rosalie said, tracing her fingers over his chest, still strong despite the years. "You said you would love me for the rest of your life. Have I kept that promise?" Jacob asked softly. Rosalie propped herself up on her elbow to look at him, at this man who had saved her and her siblings, who had given them not just a home but a family. His hair was more silver than brown now, and his face was lined with years of sun and work and laughter. He was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "You have kept every promise you ever made me," she said. "You saved us, Jacob, not just from hunger and homelessness, but from hopelessness. You gave us a family when we had lost ours. You gave me love when I thought I would never trust anyone again. You have been the best husband, the best father. I could not have asked for more." "I am the one who was saved," Jacob said, his blue eyes bright with emotion. "I was so alone, Rosalie. So lonely I did not even realize how much I was missing. And then you came into my life, this fierce, brave, beautiful woman with 3 children who needed a home. You gave me purpose, you gave me love, you gave me a family. Every day with you has been a gift." I love you, Rosalie said, the words as true now as they had been 20 years ago. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I love you too, Jacob said, pulling her down for a kiss that still made her heart race. And I will love you until my last breath and beyond. They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion that had never faded, and Rosalie thought about how lucky she was. How she had started with nothing, desperate and alone, and built this life full of love and family and joy. The years continued to unfold. Mary had 3 children, all girls, who loved visiting the ranch and following their grandpa Jacob around. Thomas and Anna had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, who worked their father's ranch and came over for big family dinners every Sunday. James married late, to a widow with a young son, and they had twin girls who were the terror and delight of the family. Daniel, their eldest son, became a teacher, marrying a woman who shared his love of learning. They settled in Redemption and had 2 children who loved books and horses in equal measure. Sarah, their youngest, shocked everyone by declaring she wanted to be a veterinarian, one of the few women pursuing such a profession. She went east to school, then came back and opened a practice in town, eventually marrying another veterinarian and having one son who inherited his mother's fierce independence. Jacob and Rosalie watched their family grow and multiply, and they held each other through the sorrows as well as the joys. They buried friends, weathered droughts and hard years, celebrated births and weddings and graduations. When Jacob turned 60, his health began to fail. His heart, the doctor said, worn out from years of hard work and hard living. He bore it stoically, but Rosalie saw the frustration in his eyes when his body would not do what his will demanded. She took over more of the ranch management, working with James, who had always planned to take over the ranch eventually. Thomas helped when he could, bringing his sons to work the cattle. The family rallied around Jacob, refusing to let him feel useless or diminished. One evening, as summer faded into fall and the air turned crisp, Jacob asked Rosalie to take a walk with him. They moved slowly now, his steps careful, her hand tucked into his arm. They walked to the creek where he had courted her all those years ago, where he had first told her he was falling in love with her. "Sit with me," Jacob said, settling onto the bank. The water burbled past, eternal and unchanging, and the sky was painted with the gold and pink of sunset. "Do you remember the first time we came here together?" Jacob asked, his voice soft. "I remember everything," Rosalie said, leaning against his shoulder. "I remember you bringing me wildflowers. I remember you telling me about your dreams for the ranch. I remember thinking I had never met anyone like you. I knew that night that I was going to marry you," Jacob said. "I knew it in my bones, the way you know the sun will rise. You were everything I had been looking for without knowing I was looking." "Jacob," Rosalie said, hearing something in his voice that made her chest tighten with fear. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," he said, taking her hand and pressing it to his chest where she could feel the unsteady rhythm of his heart. "Everything is right. I am 62 years old, Rosalie. I have been blessed with 43 years since I came west, and 23 years married to the woman I love. I have children and grandchildren who fill my life with joy. I have built something that will last, something that matters." "Stop talking like that," Rosalie said, tears filling her eyes. "You are going to be fine. You are going to be around for years yet." Jacob turned to look at her, and the love in his eyes was so fierce it stole her breath. "Maybe I will," he said, "and every day I get is a gift I will treasure. But if I do not, Rosalie, I need you to know that I have had a good life. The best life, because of you. You promised me," Rosalie said, the tears spilling over now. "You promised you would not leave me." "I will never leave you," Jacob said, wiping her tears with his thumb. "Even if this body fails me, my love for you will endure. It will live on in our children, in the ranch we built together, in every sunset we watched and every dream we shared. You are part of me, Rosalie. Nothing can change that." They sat there as the sun set, holding each other, and Rosalie memorized every detail. The feel of his arms around her, the sound of his breathing, the warmth of his body against hers, the smell of him, horse and leather and home. Jacob lived for 5 more years, years that Rosalie treasured like jewels. His health was fragile, but his spirit never faltered. He sat on the porch in his rocking chair, holding court with his grandchildren, telling them stories and teaching them lessons. He watched the ranch continue under James's capable management, taking pride in how his sons had taken what he built and made it even better. And every night, he climbed into bed beside Rosalie and they held each other in the darkness, grateful for one more day. He died peacefully in his sleep on a spring morning, with the windows open and the birds singing and Rosalie's hand in his. She woke to find him still and peaceful, and though her heart shattered into a million pieces, she was grateful that he had gone gently, without pain or fear. The funeral was attended by half the county. People came from miles around to pay their respects to Jacob Brennan, who had been known as a fair man, a good neighbor, a loving father. Rosalie stood between Thomas and James, with Daniel and Sarah on either side, and she accepted the condolences with grace, even though she wanted to scream at the injustice of it. In the weeks and months that followed, Rosalie learned to live with the grief. It never fully went away, but it softened around the edges, becoming something she could carry without it crushing her. She found comfort in her family, in the ranch that still ran with the efficiency Jacob had instilled, in the memories that lived in every corner of the house they had shared. Thomas came to her one day with a proposal. "Ma," he said, for he had called her that since the day she married Jacob, "we have been talking, James and Daniel and Sarah and I, we think we should open a home for orphan children, right here on the ranch. We have the space and we have the resources, and we thought it would be a fitting tribute to Pa, to what he did for us." Rosalie looked at her siblings, these adults who had once been the frightened, hungry children she had tried so desperately to save, and felt pride swell in her chest. "Your father would have loved that," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Let's do it." They converted the old bunkhouse into a dormitory, brought in house mothers to help, and opened the Brennan home for children in the spring of 1905. It could house up to 20 children at a time, giving them safety, education, and the chance to learn ranch skills that would serve them well. Rosalie threw herself into the project, finding purpose in helping these children the way Jacob had once helped her siblings. She taught the girls to cook and sew, told them stories, showed them that they were worthy of love and care. She watched her own children and grandchildren interact with the orphans, teaching them skills and showing them kindness, and she knew Jacob would have been so proud. She lived for another 15 years after Jacob's death, long enough to see the orphanage thrive, long enough to hold great-grandchildren and watch the family continue to grow. Her hair turned white, her steps grew slow, but her mind stayed sharp and her heart stayed full. On a warm summer evening when she was 85 years old, Rosalie sat on the front porch of the ranch house, surrounded by 3 generations of her family. The sun was setting over the land Jacob had built, painting everything golden. Children played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the breeze. The smell of dinner cooking wafted from the kitchen where Sarah's daughter was preparing the meal. Thomas sat beside her, gray-haired now himself, his own grandchildren climbing on his lap. "What are you thinking about, Ma?" he asked softly. Rosalie looked out at the land, at the family, at the life that had sprung from one act of kindness all those years ago. She thought about the desperate girl who had stolen food to feed her siblings, about the cowboy who had caught her and changed everything. "I am thinking about how blessed I have been," she said. "I am thinking about your father and how much I miss him. I am thinking about how one moment of grace changed all of our lives." "He saved us," Thomas said simply. "We saved each other," Rosalie corrected gently. "He needed a family as much as we needed a home. We built this together, all of us." That night, Rosalie went to bed in the room she had shared with Jacob, in the house full of love and life and laughter. She fell asleep looking at the photo on her bedside table, a faded image of her and Jacob on their wedding day, both of them young and full of hope. She slipped away peacefully in the night, and the family said she died with a smile on her face, as though she was seeing something wonderful. They buried her beside Jacob on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a oak tree they had planted together 40 years before. The funeral was even larger than Jacob's had been. 3 generations of Brennans and all the children who had passed through the orphanage over the years coming to pay their respects to the woman who had touched so many lives. The ranch continued, passed down through the generations. The orphanage continued too, helping hundreds of children over the decades. And the story of how it all began, of the cowboy who caught a girl stealing and made her his family, was told and retold, a legend passed down through the years. In a box in the ranch house, carefully preserved, was the contract Jacob had drawn up that first day, offering Rosalie employment and protection. Beneath it was their marriage certificate and letters they had written each other over the years and photographs of a life well lived. But the real legacy was not in papers or photographs. It was in the 5 children who had grown up loved and secure. It was in the dozens of grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried the lessons of kindness and grace forward. It was in the hundreds of orphan children who found safety and hope at the Brennan home. It was in the proof that one act of compassion, one moment of choosing kindness over judgment, could change the world. On the gate leading to the ranch, someone had hung a sign in the years after Rosalie's death. It read, "Brennan Ranch, EST, 1873, where family is made, not just born," and every person who passed through those gates, whether family by blood or family by choice, knew they were home. The story of Jacob and Rosalie Brennan became part of Texas folklore, told in saloons and churches, written about in local histories. But for their descendants, it was more than a story. It was a reminder that love could heal, that family was what you made of it, that grace and kindness could echo through generations. Years became decades, decades became a century, and still the ranch stood. Still the family gathered there for holidays and celebrations. Still the orphanage helped children in need. And still, on quiet evenings when the sun set golden over the Texas plains, you could almost feel the presence of the cowboy and the girl he had saved, the love they had built, the legacy they had left. Because some love stories do not end when the lovers die. Some love stories continue forever, written in the lives of the people they touched, in the family they created, in the grace they showed to a broken world, and this was one of those stories. A story of hunger met with abundance, of fear met with kindness, of loneliness met with love. A story that began with a desperate act and a choice to show mercy and grew into something beautiful that would last forever. Thomas's grandson, standing at that grave site on the 100th anniversary of Jacob and Rosalie's wedding, holding his own young son, said it best. They showed us what love really means, not just romance, though they had that too. But the choice to care for someone, to build a life with them, to create something bigger than yourself, that is what they gave us. That is what we pass on. And in the end, what more could anyone hope to leave behind than that? A family loved, a life well lived, and a legacy of kindness that would echo through the ages. The sun set over the Brennan Ranch that evening as it had for over 130 years, painting the sky in gold and amber and rose. Cattle grazed in the distance. Children played in the yard. Dinner waited on the stove. And somewhere in that space between memory and eternity, a cowboy and a desperate girl who had stolen food for her siblings smiled at what they had built together. They had caught each other, saved each other, loved each other. They had created family where there was none, had shown that grace could change everything, had proved that love, real love, was the most powerful force in the world. And that legacy, built on kindness and fed by love, would endure forever.